The war started on a Tuesday. Not with an explosion, but with a silence that covered the sky like a blanket. Ships vanished from the radar. Satellites went black, and communication with the outer colonies was lost. By the time Earth's defense command realized what was happening, 3 planets were already gone. They called it a surgical invasion because there were no survivors and no damage left behind, just silence and missing cities. The enemy didn't come to fight, they came to erase. Among the chaos, a transport ship carrying refugees from Vega 9 crash-landed near Outpost 42. It was a small, human military colony on the edge of the Taurus Belt. Most of the passengers died. On impact, only one survived. She was a girl, barely 18 in Earth years, with deep blue-gray skin and glowing red eyes. Her body was fragile, and her clothes were torn, covered in soot and blood. They found her clutching a red scarf that wasn't even hers to the soldiers. She was nothing but another useless alien. They labeled her as non-combatant unknown species category 6. She didn't speak their language, didn't eat their food, and didn't even cry. They placed her near the edge of the supply depot. Stairs. No one talked to her. No one sat near her. She became part of the background, like the rusted crates or the broken drones lying around. To them, she wasn't a threat or an ally, just a breathing reminder of a war they were losing. Captain Ronner had seen death many times before. He was tired of missions, tired of false victories, and most of all, tired of being told who to care about. When he saw the girl sitting alone for 3 days without moving, he didn't ask for orders. He walked to her slowly, holding a piece of bread and a water canister. Everyone stopped and stared. Soldiers whispered behind his back, "She's useless." One of them said, "She's probably spying for them." Another muttered, "He didn't care." He sat down beside her without saying a word. The air between them felt cold and silent, like the vacuum outside the station. The girl turned her head slightly, her red eyes blinking softly as if waking from a long sleep. She didn't move away. She just looked at him. Ronner placed the bread gently on her lap and pushed the water closer to her hand. Then he sat back and watched the sky, pretending not to notice how she studied his every move. It was quiet for a long time, and then she spoke. Her voice was broken, like static through an old radio. "You're my first friend," she whispered. Ronner turned his head sharply, not because of her words, but because she had spoken in perfect English, clear, soft, and with a sadness that weighed heavier than gravity. She didn't smile, but something in her eyes changed. A flicker of light where there had only been ash, and that was the moment. Everything changed, not just for her, not just for him, but for the war that had swallowed stars whole without blinking. Ronner didn't say anything in return. He simply stayed there beside her as the first warning sirens began to scream. Across the outpost, the enemy was coming again, and this time, the useless alien girl would not be left behind. Asterisk. The sirens echoed through the outpost like a scream. Trapped in metal walls, soldiers rushed to their stations, grabbing weapons and sliding on helmets while alarms painted the sky red. Ronner stood up quickly and turned to the alien girl who was still sitting beside the steps. She didn't flinch like the others. Her glowing red eyes scanned the sky as if she already knew what was coming. Her hand still held the red cloth tightly against her chest like it was the only thing she trusted. Ronner extended his hand toward her. He didn't say anything, but his eyes told her that she had a choice to make. She looked at his hand, then slowly placed her own small fingers in his palm. Her skin was warm but strange, smooth like metal, but alive like fire. She stood up carefully, as if her body was unsure how to move on this gravity. Her steps were soft, silent, yet confident. Ronner led her through the rushing crowd, past officers yelling codes and engineers pulling wires from control panels. Nobody stopped him this time. Maybe they were too busy to care. Or maybe they had seen something change. When they reached the underground shelter doors, a tall officer blocked their path. He was built like a tank and had no patience for things he didn't understand. He pointed at the girl and barked, "She doesn't go in there. That space is for personnel only." Ronner stepped in front of her, his tone calm but firm. "She stays with me," he said while locking eyes with the man. The officer stared for a moment, then stepped aside without another word. Inside the shelter, the air was thick and smelled like fuel and sweat. People sat against the walls with rifles between their legs and fear in their eyes. Ronner found a corner near the communication panels and let the girl sit on the floor beside him. She still didn't say much, but her eyes wandered across the faces in the room. Faces that didn't look back at her. Faces that avoided her like she was invisible. Ronner noticed the hurt in her silence. He bent down slightly and whispered, "You're safe here. I promise." She nodded once and then closed her eyes for a moment. Above them, the vibrations grew louder as the enemy ships began to descend. Their engines made no roar, only a deep hum like the sound of death breathing softly. Every soldier in the room held their weapon tighter. Suddenly, the power flickered, the emergency lights blinked, and the room dimmed to a red glow. A voice came through the intercom, shaky and urgent. "Sector 3 breached. We have enemy contact near the East Corridor. All units prepare to engage." People jumped to their feet, hearts racing as boots thundered toward the exit. Ronner stood as well, gripping his plasma rifle and glancing back at the girl. She looked up at him and said something in a language he didn't recognize. It wasn't English, but it wasn't just alien either. It sounded like music wrapped in warning. Ronner leaned down and asked gently, "What did you say?" She repeated the words, slower, more clearly this time. "Their ships are not the real danger. Something else is coming." He didn't understand it fully, but something in her voice chilled his bones. This wasn't fear or panic, it was certainty. And Ronner had learned long ago to trust what people say when they're that sure. He nodded once and turned to leave with the others. But then he stopped, looked back at her, and tossed his backup device into her hands. "If I don't come back, use this. Call for help. You'll know how." She caught it without blinking and held it tightly like she had held the red cloth. As the door closed behind him, she sat silently, her eyes glowing in the red light like twin warnings in the dark. And for the first time since she arrived, she was not afraid. Ronner moved through the steel hallway with quick steps and focused eyes. The alarms continued to echo behind him, but he had trained himself to think clearly under pressure. His squad had already formed up near the Eastern Corridor entrance. The air smelled of heat and tension. Weapons were loaded, and every soldier had that look, the one between bravery and fear. They were ready to fight, but not ready to die. Ronner took position near the front and gave hand signals to his team. They responded instantly, spreading out behind cover and pointing their rifles at the sealed blast doors. The lights above blinked yellow, warning of breach pressure building from the other side. He tightened the grip on his rifle and looked at the data screen on his wrist. No clear reading of life forms, but the tech had failed before in similar attacks. Whatever was on the other side was cloaked or something, unknown to their scanners. The blast doors hissed and opened halfway before jamming. Through the gap, dark shadows moved silent and smooth like they were gliding instead of walking. The first figure stepped forward, tall and armored in bone-white plating, its head turned slowly, scanning with no visible eyes. Then it raised a weapon that didn't look like any firearm humans had seen. It was curved, humming softly, and seemed to pull energy from the air itself. Ronner fired the first shot, hitting the creature square in the chest. The round melted against the armor, like it was water on stone. The creature didn't stop walking. The squad opened fire together, bullets and plasma lighting up the hallway. Still, the enemy moved without fear or reaction. One soldier screamed as another figure appeared behind him, pulling him into the darkness. Ronner shouted for the team to fall back. They tossed grenades and smoke charges as they retreated toward the second corridor. The explosions lit the place with blue flames, But no screams came from the enemy side. It wasn't a battle, it was a hunt, and they were the ones being hunted for every step they took. The enemy seemed already waiting. Back in the underground shelter, the alien girl sat perfectly still. Her eyes remained closed, but her lips moved. Silently, speaking to something no one else could see. The comm device on her lap pulsed softly with blue light. A small boy in the shelter pointed at her and whispered to his mother, "She's glowing," he said, but the mother pulled him close and turned away. Fear made people blind to miracles. The girl opened her eyes and looked at the device in her hands. Her fingers moved over the buttons. Not guessing, but knowing. She was activating something far older than the shelter itself. The room dimmed again, and people gasped when a soft humming filled the air. Holograms lit up around her like stars. Being born in the darkness, symbols danced in the air, alien yet beautiful. Above the surface, Ronner and the remaining soldiers reached the final checkpoint. Only 4 of them remained from the original 12. Their backs were to the control panel, and the doors behind them were locking tight. The enemy approached slowly, unhurried, and certain. Their weapons hummed louder, drawing energy from something that pulsed underground. Ronner suddenly remembered the girl's words. Something else is coming, not the enemy in front of them, but something beneath them, something they hadn't yet seen. He looked at the floor beneath his boots. There was a faint vibration he hadn't noticed before. It was steady, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Back in the shelter, the girl stood up slowly. People stepped away from her, uncertain whether to run or watch. She walked to the center of the room and held up the device. Her voice was no longer a whisper. It was clear and calm, like a bell ringing through fog. "I am the daughter of the last signal keeper, and I remember everything." The shelter fell silent as her words echoed off the metal walls. People stared in shock, unable to believe that the quiet, useless alien girl was now glowing with power. Children clung to their parents while the soldiers in the back slowly raised their weapons but didn't fire. The girl ignored their fear. Her fingers moved quickly over the alien device as symbols hovered around her like tiny stars. Each symbol lit up and shifted in color, as if responding to her thoughts. The lights in the shelter changed too. The red emergency glow faded to soft blue as hidden panels in the ceiling opened silently. Unknown technology powered up around them, systems the humans had never discovered before. A man from the engineering team stepped forward slowly. He wore a yellow jumpsuit and had a scanner shaking in his hands. "This tech isn't ours," he whispered. "It's buried under the outpost and it's active." The girl turned her eyes to him and spoke gently. "This place was built on ancient ground. My people left guardians here before your kind arrived. They are waking now because the true danger is near." Her voice was calm but carried a deep sadness, like someone remembering a funeral they never attended, like someone who had lived through the end once before. Meanwhile, above ground, Ronner and the surviving squad members reached the edge of the generator core. They were cornered with no exit, but refused to fall without resistance. Ronner stood in front, rifle raised, breathing hard but steady. The enemy stepped closer, tall and silent, their armor reflecting the flickering lights of the dying hallway. One raised its weapon again, and this time, energy gathered like a storm at its center. Ronner knew they only had seconds left. Suddenly, the floor beneath them pulsed with blue light. The enemy paused, looking down as if confused by the sudden change. A loud chime rang through the hallway, shaking the walls with sound from the metal around them. Blue lines of energy spread like veins. Symbols appeared on the walls and floors, pulsing in sync with the girl's voice underground. Ronner lowered his weapon for a second and whispered, "She did something." The enemy turned to retreat, but the hallway closed behind them with a flash of solid light. They were trapped now, unable to move forward or back. Then the ground opened beneath their feet. Pillars rose from the floor, covered in glowing alien text. Energy surged through the room, wrapping the enemy in beams of shifting light. Their weapons failed instantly, fading to dust in their hands. Ronner and his team watched in awe as the enemy was pulled into the light. There were no screams, no sounds of pain, only silence as they vanished one by one. When the last one disappeared, the hallway went still again. He touched his earpiece and spoke quickly. "Command, this is Ronner. Something just saved us. I think it's the girl." His voice shook slightly, not from fear, but disbelief. Back in the shelter, the girl collapsed to her knees. The device dimmed in her hands, and the symbols faded from the air. She looked pale, her skin flickering like a dying light. Ronner's voice came through the device near her. She reached for it slowly and pressed the button with trembling fingers. "I'm here," she said, her voice soft again. "You saved us." Ronner's voice replied. She didn't answer, only leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. She looked peaceful, but her body was clearly exhausted. No one in the shelter spoke for a while. They had seen something impossible and didn't know what it meant, but none of them could call her useless anymore. When Ronner returned to the shelter, the girl was sitting quietly with her back against the wall. Her eyes were open but distant, as if she were listening to something far away. The device lay beside her, flickering with low energy. He walked toward her slowly, not wanting to startle her, but she looked up before he could speak, her expression calm but tired. "You came back," she said simply. Ronner knelt down and set his rifle aside. "You saved us," he replied. Her gaze didn't change, but her fingers curled slightly as if reacting to warmth. Around the room, people stared without speaking. They weren't afraid anymore, but they didn't understand her either. Some nodded respectfully. Others simply watched in silence. Ronner reached into his coat and pulled out a small protein bar. He handed it to her without saying anything more. She took it gently and began to eat, her movements slow but precise. "You said you remember everything," he said after a moment. She paused, then nodded. "My people built these guardians to protect forgotten places like this one." He sat down beside her, his armor creaking against the metal floor. "And you? What are you exactly?" "I am what remains of them," she said softly. He didn't ask more right away. She had just saved their lives and awakened technology buried for centuries. The answers would come when she was ready. "I thought I was alone," she added after a long pause. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but steady. "No one had spoken to me until you did." Not like a person. Ronner looked around at the shelter walls, at the humans still unsure what to make of her. They were alive because of her, yet still unsure if she belonged. That was the way fear worked. It clung to ignorance like a disease. "You're not alone anymore," he said. She glanced at him, and for a moment, the red glow in her eyes softened to something warmer. She gave a small nod but said nothing more. Suddenly, a loud crack came from the eastern wall of the shelter. A deep vibration shook the ground, followed by faint distant pulses. Engineers rushed to scan the readings and report to command. Ronner stood quickly, reaching for his weapon again. He turned to the girl, who was already on her feet. "It's not over," she said quietly. The shelter's main console lit up with warnings. A new signal had been detected approaching from beyond the belt. Its signature didn't match any known enemy class. "It's them," she said. Her voice had changed again, now colder and sharper. "The true ones behind the silence." Ronner looked at the console and saw the approaching fleet's size. His heart sank. This wasn't an army, it was a wave that would erase everything in its path. "What do we do now?" he asked. She stepped forward, placing her hand on the console. The symbols reappeared, brighter than before. "I need access to your command link," she said. Ronner hesitated, then nodded and activated his code. The system beeped and opened. Full control to her. She closed her eyes and whispered something ancient. The symbols spun faster, the room temperature rising slightly, panels around them opened, revealing structures hidden behind walls. They were weapons old and unlike anything human-made. Floating drones shaped like spinning stones began to activate. Each one moved with precision, scanning and humming as they came online. "This is your last chance," she said as the shelter shook again. "If we don't stop them here, nothing else will remain." Ronner placed his hand on her shoulder, steady and strong. "We fight with you," he said. She turned her head slightly, and for the first time, she smiled. It wasn't wide or dramatic, just real. Asterisk above the colony. The sky turned a strange shade of purple as the unknown fleet entered orbit. They moved without sound, without broadcast, without pattern. Their formation stretched like a net across the stars. On the ground, defense units scrambled to position. Command issued full battle alerts, and drones lifted into the air in swarms. Every soldier knew this was different from the last wave. Inside the shelter, the girl stood in front of the console with her hands raised. Energy surged through her body and out into the control systems. The ancient weapons answered her presence as if recognizing one of their own. The floating drone she awakened earlier flew into tunnels, hidden beneath the station. Metal groaned as old doors unlocked, releasing war machines built long before Earth's first satellite. Massive pillars rose outside the colony, glowing with layered rings of blue and white light. Ronner watched silently, sweat rolling down his forehead as the air shimmered. He had seen advanced weapons before, but nothing like this. It felt like the colony itself had awakened from sleep. "She's not just a survivor," one of the engineers whispered. "She's part of the system," said another. "She was meant to be found." The girl turned to Ronner with focused eyes. "These weapons need direction. Your people must guard the perimeter while I channel the defense protocol. You are the shield while I become the signal." Ronner nodded and barked orders into his com. Troops moved instantly, rallying around the shield pillars and preparing for contact. The colony transformed into a fortress in less than 5 minutes. Above them, the enemy fleet descended in waves of black metal. Their shapes shifted in the sky like smoke turning to fire. When they reached the upper atmosphere, they unleashed darts of light that fell like burning rain. Human defenses fired back with plasma blasts and rail cannons. The air turned into a storm of metal, fire, and light. But the enemy adapted quickly, moving between shots like they knew them before they came. Then the alien girl stepped forward and placed her hand on the main energy core. A massive surge of light erupted from the colony's pillars, reaching the sky in vertical beams. The falling enemy crafts were caught mid-air and twisted into nothingness. Cheers erupted through the coms as human soldiers saw the impact. The first wave had been stopped, no survivors on the enemy side. But the celebration was short. A new pulse shook the ground, deeper and darker than before. The girl's expression changed as she whispered one word. "Commanders." 5 enormous ships emerged from the cloud cover above, each one larger than a mountain and shaped like a claw reaching down to crush the surface. Their engines didn't make sound. They erased it. Even the ancient weapons paused. For a moment, flickering slightly in their glow, the girl swayed on her feet as if their presence alone weakened her. Ronner moved to her side and caught her elbow before she fell. "Are you all right?" he asked quickly. She nodded, but her skin looked dimmer than before. "They're draining the signal. They were built to silence us." He helped her steady herself and looked out the reinforced viewing panel. The claws were lowering toward the ground, their centers glowing with dark red energy. "One strike from them could level everything. I can stop them," she said. "But I will need more than this signal. I will need him." Ronner raised a brow. "Him?" he asked carefully. She looked into his eyes with quiet certainty. "You've been touched by the signal too. That's why you heard me clearly the first time. That's why you sat beside me when no one else did. You are part of this now." He didn't understand it completely, but he trusted her. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and placed his hand over hers on the core. The system reacted instantly, flooding with light and new symbols. Together, their presence changed the signal pattern. The lights turned golden, and the colony's weapons gained new energy. And above them, the enemy claws finally hesitated. As the golden energy pulsed through the colony's core, the ground itself responded. Metallic roots hidden deep below the surface came alive, rising from the soil like ancient limbs. They wrapped around buildings and defensive towers, linking everything into a single living network. Ronner felt heat run through his veins, not burning, but powerful. It was like his body had been plugged into a force older than the stars. Beside him, the girl stood taller now, her glow returning stronger than before. Above them, the 5 claw-shaped ships hovered with hesitation. The dark energy within them flickered, disrupted by the new signal rising from below. For the first time, the enemy seemed unsure. Inside the command room, officers monitored every screen with wide eyes. The readings no longer matched anything in their systems. This was no longer just human technology, it was something else entirely. The girl looked toward the sky and raised her other hand. Golden light shot upward like a beacon, splitting into 5 streams aimed directly at the ships. Each being wrapped around a vessel and held it in place. Ronner watched in awe as the claws trembled under the grip of the signal. The ships began to push back, but the energy resisted their force. A battle of strength and will unfolded silently above the planet. I cannot hold them alone, the girl said through gritted teeth. Her skin flickered between light and shadow, fighting to stay whole. Ronner stepped closer and placed both hands over the control panel. I'm here, he said simply. The core answered with a new surge of power, and the golden light brightened. The beams tightened around the ships, causing cracks in their dark surfaces. One of the claw ships exploded in a flash of red and black. The shockwave echoed across the sky, making the air ripple like water. Soldiers on the surface cheered, but the girl did not relax. There are 4 more, she said, and the last one carries something worse. Ronner didn't ask what he could feel it now. From the center of the remaining fleet, the largest ship opened its lower hatch. What emerged wasn't a weapon, but a being, tall, thin, and wrapped in black threads that moved like smoke. It descended slowly, untouched by gravity. Its face was hidden behind a mask of shifting metal, but its presence alone made the ground tremble. The girl stepped away from the console, her face pale again. That is the silence made flesh, she whispered. The one who ends voices and leaves only stillness. Ronner turned to her and asked, "Can we stop it?" She looked up at him with tired but determined eyes. "We can, but not with weapons." The being landed just beyond the colony's gates. It didn't speak, but its presence drained light and sound from the air. Even the birds had vanished from the sky. The colony defenses fired automatically, but the beams bent away from it. Nothing touched its skin, nothing slowed its steps. It walked like death wearing armor. The girl walked toward the exit with slow, steady steps. Ronner followed without hesitation, ignoring the shouts from behind. She reached the gate and placed her hand on it. The metal slid open, and the 2 of them stepped outside. The silence being stood waiting, unmoving and unreadable. The wind blew between them, dry and hollow. "I was born for this moment," she said quietly. Her voice echoed across the empty field like a final song. Ronner stepped beside her and nodded. "If we fall together," he replied. She looked at him and gave a faint smile. "Then I am not afraid anymore." Ground beneath them began to glow again. A ring of light surrounded their feet. Rising upward like a dome, the being stepped forward, raising its black hand. Ronner reached out and took the girl's hand firmly. Their light fused, golden and red swirling like a storm. The silence being halted, sensing something it didn't expect. The golden and red light surrounding them pulsed like a living heart. It pushed outward in every direction, forming a barrier between the two and the silence being. The creature stopped mid-step, its black threads writhing like smoke trapped in sunlight. The girl tightened her grip on Ronner's hand. Her eyes glowed brighter than ever, radiating pure energy. The air around them shimmered as the ground hummed beneath their feet. "It's afraid," she said. Ronner glanced at the creature and saw the slightest movement in its form. It shifted backward, recoiling from the fusion of human and ancient signal. The light around them responded to her voice. It rose higher and faster, spinning in perfect circles. Symbols floated between them, binding their connection. Ronner didn't understand the language, but he didn't need to. He felt it deep in his bones, a bond not of words, but purpose. Together, they were more than human or alien. They were hope. The silence being raised both arms, sending out a wave of dark energy. The ground split open where it passed, leaving cracks and shadows. The golden barrier held, but it began to flicker under pressure. The girl stepped forward, dragging the light with her. Ronner moved beside her, his breath steady despite the heat around them. He felt like they were standing inside a star. She raised her free hand and whispered something only the signal could hear. The symbols around them ignited, changing from gold to white. The air snapped. With a sound like the breaking of chains, the creature stumbled for the first time. It let out a shriek not from its mouth, but from the ground itself. The colony shook violently as if trying to resist its own memories. "We must finish it now," she said. She looked at Ronner, her eyes fierce and alive. "You are the key to the human voice. Speak." Ronner's mind raced. He wasn't a poet or a leader, he was just a soldier. But he understood what she meant. He stepped forward and shouted with everything he had. "We do not belong to fear. We do not kneel to silence. We live, and we remember." His voice cut through the dark like a blade. The creature froze, threads unraveling as the words struck it. It tried to step back, but the light trapped it inside the circle. The girl added her own voice, speaking in her lost tongue. Together, their voices became a roar. The creature screamed again, but it was too late. The energy dome collapsed inward, crushing its form to ash. The sky cleared instantly. The remaining enemy ships began to retreat, engines flashing in panic. The battle was over. Ronner collapsed to one knee, breathing hard. The girl fell beside him, her body shaking with exhaustion. But she was smiling. The soldiers emerged from the colony gates, wide-eyed and silent. They had seen the impossible and didn't know how to react. Then someone clapped once, and others followed. It became a cheer. Not loud but powerful. Ronner helped the girl to her feet as the sun broke through the clouds. She looked around and saw something new in their eyes. Respect. They walked back to the shelter side by side. No one avoided her now. Children stepped aside and waved gently. Inside, the command team approached her with quiet gratitude. She spoke only once. "You must never bury the past again." They all nodded later. She sat on the same steps where Ronner had first seen her. This time, he sat beside her without hesitation. She looked at him and whispered, "I have a name. Would you like to hear it?" Ronner smiled and nodded. She spoke the word softly, and it echoed with meaning. "It means the one who listens." He repeated it slowly, committing it to memory. Then he looked at her and said, "Thank you, my friend." She turned to him with warmth in her eyes and whispered, "You were my first friend."